Welcome, everyone. I'm Catherine Baker. I'm director of this. Thank you. All right, I will take that. Who doesn't love that? I am thrilled to welcome you to the UC Student and Policy Center for our third annual end of session sesh. And I'm going to tell you, I love all the UC children, all the events we have here. This is my favorite one. Because we have a really good set of voices on what's happening in the legislature in the most important state in the union at probably the most critical time of year. It's not just the end of session, it's the end of this term. And it's at a time when we're going to have a gubernatorial transition and possibly changes at the federal level. You just don't know. I'm not weighing in on that at all. But what a critical time to be talking about what's happening in the next few weeks. And we've got some terrific voices that you're going to hear from about this. I will introduce them to you shortly. But first, I'm going to tell you when you also want to come to the center is on August 18th. Our next California Leaders Speakers Series is with the wonderful Dr. Shirley Weber, our Secretary of State, and also a great timed conversation. We'll not only talk with her about her career in public service, which has been in higher education, service at the local level, in the state legislature, including as budget chair, and a passionate education reformer, but also, of course, at Secretary of State's office. We will talk about her leadership lessons, some of her favorite war stories, and election policy. In this election cycle, there's a lot going on, so I hope you will join us for that. It will be moderated by yours truly, so I'm going to have to up my game. Please RSVP for that. QR code is there, and there's some flyers out front as well. And then if you want to find out about more announcements, we have more exciting things happening in August and September and throughout the fall. Please sign up for our newsletter because that's where we get all of our propaganda out, and we love to hear from you. Now, for this end of session event, we do this so that we can have some insights on what's really happening in the next few weeks, what's going to potentially die, what's going to live, and even some advice for how to get your bills and proposals better positioned to get across the finish line and pitfalls to avoid. I'm looking at you, Angie. And we have a fantastic panel, and they're all very important in policy making, and one of them is so important he's not here yet, and that's Ben Golombek from Cal Chamber. He's in an important meeting right now that we're going to have to press him to tell us all about, but he'll be joining us in just a moment. And this conversation is going to be moderated by Nicole Nixon, who covers California politics for the Los Angeles Times, and she's also been covering politics and government in California for over a decade, previously with the SACB and National Public Radio, as I recall, or Public Radio. And we are delighted to have her here. Her hometown is Salt Lake City, but you are probably a Californian at heart. And we have Knaus from the California State Association of Counties. I gotta make sure I have that right. We have Kate Gordon, who is CEO of California Forward. I know, I am on the board. But she's also at UC Berkeley's Haas School, and so we're happy to have her. And Angie Way, who's been an important, well, okay. That was a cheer that went even louder than mine, so now I'm jealous. I'm going to let you take it away, Nicole. Thank you. Please welcome our panelists.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to our panelists. I'm excited to get Ben in here also. Before we get to the preview, I kind of want to reminisce about sessions so far. I want to ask each of you, maybe we can just go down the line, starting with Graham. Were there any big surprises so far this year? Any like deals that were negotiated, maybe something that did or didn't get into the budget or passed so far?
Hey, good afternoon. How y'all doing? I would reference two things. The first is that there's a sleeper issue that deals with liability that counties may face. That is many, many billions of dollars in an area where we are prohibited from keeping records and yet required to defend cases, sometimes from unscrupulous attorneys. And so what is surprising is that hasn't happened yet. Still working on it, but it has a massive amount of exposure to communities, and we're trying to ensure that children are protected, counties are protected, and there's a right balanced system on a going forward basis. So that's the first surprise related to that. The second one I would just reference is there was a nuclear war brewing between Uber and Lyft and consumer attorneys. And that was headed to the ballot, and it was going to be many hundreds of millions of dollars just for that one. There were multiple competing measures, and surprisingly, they were able to figure out how you back away from what was a major fight that was brewing. And so that went away, which is probably good for everyone to not have to go through that over the course of the next several months.
I'll ask a little bit, we'll talk a little bit more about ballot measures. Kate, what are some big surprises for you this session so far?
No, I'm on. Awesome. I mean, a lot in the energy and climate space, which is the space I come from, although also now very involved in economic development, which is part of that picture, which we can talk about. So much stuff has been held over, to be honest. I mean, the big issues, cap and invest, the greenhouse gas reduction fund spending, wildfire liability and funding, all of the sort of things in the world of like affordability are still live. So we'll talk about all of those. I was actually really surprised. I think there was a whole side conversation going on around a potential CEQA exemption for the California Forever project in Solano, which is the big project on a bunch of land in Solano to build sort of a model city. And it's been there's a lot of discussion about it. And it's supposed to be sort of a sustainable model city. I think we all kind of expected that deal to happen, and it didn't, which was very interesting. So that was a surprise to me that did not go through, at least not yet. And there's not a special CEQA exemption for that project, at least not at this moment. So that was interesting.
Angie?
Thank you. I'd say, just to build on Graham's point, I think something surprising to me is this whole ballot measure process. First, what got filed to be put on the ballot. Next, what got negotiated off. I agree, was a little bit of a surprise, but I wasn't that surprised. More surprising, though, is the things that didn't get negotiated off. And, I've self-assigned myself today to be the shit talker, and part of that is going to be to stir things up a little bit and just, maybe get us to be a little bit more cutting edge and controversial. I think we really need to relook at this process of whether or not you can negotiate off or leverage off your ballot measure. It was meant to be in good public policy when this reform was created. Has it sustained that purpose? Are we still in the business of public policy, or are we shifting into a mode of private policy making? And I think it's something that's worth looking at for everybody.
Apologize for being a couple minutes late. Good to see everybody, and thank you as always for the invitation. I believe Angie said that her goal today was to talk crap to me specifically, so I'm really, really excited about it.
Always hold two agendas.
Sure. Yeah, smart. Well, again, a little bit of a broken record, but so it's sort of a combination of the two things, which is one, I feel like the issue of affordability has lost its meaning a little bit because it's basically taken from all sides, and I will saying this as the EVP at the Cal Chamber who has our affordability agenda, so I'm not saying that we are totally blameless in this effort here, but I do think that for basically everybody's still seeing the same polling. I think that we all are, and that affordability is top of mind for voters as we head into the November election, and so basically every bill gets tagged with trying to help affordability, but it's the point of the ballot measure process ate up so much of the bandwidth in certainly April, May, June, that candidly a lot of the big legislative deals, or in some cases budget deals, didn't get done. There just wasn't the time, there wasn't the energy, there wasn't the oxygen. You also had obviously the crazy primary, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more going on as well. But the ballot measure space ate up so much oxygen and bandwidth for folks that I think it pushed off a lot of the legislative deals around sort of whether it's affordability or everything else. And I'm sure we'll dive into more of that. But there were so many ballot measures and so many negotiations going on, some real, some more theatrical. It's just left a lot on the plate here for the last month.
I wanted to talk about this, trend. We're seeing more of negotiations to get ballot measures polled. These tend to happen in late June when the budget talks are also hitting a crescendo. Sounds like you two agree that this maybe isn't the best way to do things. Some would argue it might be better to have negotiations between interested parties than have voters, vote on everything with conflicting, confusing messaging. I'm not saying, that's an argument I've heard, that voters should decide. But what would be a better alternative here?
How about the legislative process?
Yeah.
I mean,
It exists for a reason, to take on our most challenging problems and promote solutions. Why aren't we using the legislative process?
yeah, Angie's exactly right. I mean, the initiative process was created in California because there was massive corruption that needed to be stopped. That's not what it's used for. It's used as an end run around a legislative process. And if you have enough money, if you can cut that check, you can put any brilliant or harebrained idea on the ballot, and then you just run a marketing campaign. And it's not like that in other states to the same degree, and so there's a better way to do it. And we should be both open to that, and we should also be driving how we get there in a way that is actually productive for policymaking in California.
Can I jump in with one thing, which is I agree, and certainly as a former legislative staffer with Angie banging on my door and giving me a hard time on stuff, I agree that the legislative process is generally a better way to go, that there are so many issues that get brought to the voters that should not be brought to the voters. They're not equipped for ballot measures. I will also say, and obviously I'm not going to speak for every organization that decided to try to put something on the ballot this year. We can obviously dive into that, some of the things moving forward. But I'll certainly say from our standpoint with our ballot proposition, Prop 45, which is the reason we decided to move forward was because we have tried for years to streamline the production of housing, clean energy, water, and other broadband, other essential infrastructure. And there was, while there's been some, I would say, slow and incremental progress made the last couple of years, some member Wicks, Senator Wiener, the governor, and others who've been helping to lead that charge, the type of large-scale reform needed to meet our climate and housing and water goals, simply the legislature was unwilling to dive in and do that type of work. And so the ballot measure was the last vestige after 15, 20 years of trying to work through the legislative process. That being said, there is no doubt that it is being used today sort of not in the way that it was intended, and I think that there's certainly, consideration for sort of does this negotiation period work, I think needs to be a serious conversation that's had going forward.
Go ahead.
I would just say that qualifying a ballot measure for the actual ballot goes through a process in which there can be games played, cheating, manipulation, every step of the way. It's a messed up process. And there's just too much.
You can curse, come on.
I'm a proud UC graduate. I'm going to try and withhold the standard here. And so it's just a process that's rife with possibilities on the bad side. And so we really need to think about how to clean all of that up. And I also think that I worked for the governor, for Gavin Newsom. I was his legislative secretary. I believe in the legislature, and we should not allow the legislature to abdicate their responsibilities. Their job is to make public policy to protect all of us. And by doing private deals that go to the ballot, that skip them all together, and all they get is an up or down at the end, that is allowing them to wash their hands of their jobs and their responsibilities. So I don't have to go before them anymore, so I can say these things.
Well, there's this little initiative, the billionaire's tax, which is, politically a monster of its own now, but it's also hung over the budget conversation, I understand. Maybe some of you can talk about if you were trying to get stuff from the budget, how that impacted any conversations, or maybe not.
Well, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the billionaire's tax because we represent counties, and that's not something that we're going to touch on in any way. And so I will no longer be in this chair in about 35 seconds. But there is a point that you're making, though, which is when ballot initiatives and negotiation around them going on or coming off or what have you occur, they do take over the entire process. And Ben referenced this. And that's exactly what occurred this year, and it occurred at the same moment that they were charged, the legislature was charged with finalizing the budget. And that makes it very difficult. You can't really do both very well. So you got to pick, or you do both not so well. And so I think there are implications to that. We would certainly point to something like HR 1 and the potential to do something bigger on HR 1 to ensure that there is health care that is accessible in communities, and that the federal government walking away doesn't translate to the state not doing as much as it can in a partnership. And so we're working through that right now, and that could have been a conversation that happened and was completed in June. And so when you have those big ballot conversations occurring, it does displace the ability to have thoughtful conversations and reach an end goal on really complex issues.
You're saying that, I mean, your organization has been saying that, HR 1, a lot of the impacts of HR 1 cuts will actually fall to the counties, maybe more than the state. And it sounds like you're saying that that didn't get as much attention, or that conversation didn't have as much oxygen because the billionaire's tax and all these other ballot measures.
Yeah, I mean, the legislature, the final budget includes a number of things related to HR 1 that we're very thankful for. And so it's a good start. The conversation wasn't completed. And it wasn't completed, I don't think for lack of interest in doing so, but because you only have so much bandwidth to actually get something done, and there's only so much political capital, the folks have to navigate through that. And it was redirected to trying to solve other issues that are going to happen in November.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Any other thoughts on billionaire's tax and how that's just overshadowed things in the legislature and the budget? Ben, go for it.
I mean, Cal Chamber, I know you'll all be shocked to hear we oppose the billionaire's tax, so that's shocking to hear. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously been a lot of coverage in Politico, LA Times, Chronicle, and others, but I mean, to me, the dynamics obviously, within the labor community and the progressive community, and seeing unions come out against a tax like this has certainly been really interesting, and shaping, I think, a lot of political dynamics also going on, some of the ballot negotiations that were going on, and certainly as we're heading into the ballot measure season here going forward. So I'd love to hear more about that from some people on the panel as well.
I thought I was going to shit talk to you.
I better get out front.
I mean, just on this, I think the billionaire's tax, and actually thinking about what Angie was saying earlier too, the entire process is not lending itself right now to long-term planning and thoughtful process in any way. Like, everything is reactive, everything is short-term. You can say that about every aspect of everything. I mean, we're facing this like unprecedented moment in terms of both the removal of federal money for a bunch of things that we're counting on now we have to backfill, but at the same time, massive increase in climate impacts and disaster response spending, which will not stop. It's not a year-by-year thing. It's going to keep happening. On top of, massive geopolitical changes that are making things more expensive and harder in many of our key industries. And we're doing all this reaction to it. And I think the billionaire's tax, it's relevant because doing a one-time tax to pay for things over the long term is not actually thoughtful planning. And whatever you think about wealth inequality, which is massive in this state. We just passed Louisiana as the most inequitable state in the country. We have a third of our population living paycheck to paycheck. We are not doing a good job with wealth creation and shared prosperity in this state. However, that is not going to be solved by a thing that's a one-time tax then pays for things over the long term, which then you run into the problem of how do we pay for them over the long term. We're running into this problem with everything. We're running into this problem with cap and invest, which is based on proceeds coming in from carbon emissions, which is going down, which is supposed to go down over time, and just is facing a huge cliff this year. We're running into this problem with the gas tax, which pays for our roads, and the money's going down. We're running into this problem with disaster response. We spent our whole wildfire fund on the LA fires. We have to figure out what to do now. Every one of these problems is about a short-term response to a long-term set of problems. And just to echo what Angie said, yes, the legislative process, but I want to see people step up and actually address these problems and talk about trade-offs. Everything we just talked about has trade-offs inherent in it. We need to build stuff and we need to conserve. We need to balance uses. We need to think about affordability, not just in terms of the cost of things, but people's ability to pay for things. Everything is a trade-off. And we're not having an honest conversation about that. We're having a series of reactive conversations with short-term fixes that are solving things through tiny little tactical regulatory processes, and it is not actually a way to govern, I would argue. So there, I will join you in the shit talking.
I'd like to just +1 everything Kate has just said, and you kind of just bummed me out. Because we have some major structural challenges in California, and because of the politics of the game, everybody wants to hit a home run all the time. And sometimes the way you get, what are those, points on the board, is through the little things.
Yeah.
Singles, bunts. Even some bunts, a safety even, right? So like sometimes you got to add the points up by taking these smaller steps, and people don't have the wherewithal. And I'm going to say this I'm going to call myself as part of it, the advocacy community. It's incumbent upon us too to be able to take a longer term view rather than saying to members or funders or constituents, oh, we got this bill. Who freaking cares? No offense. But who cares about that little bitty bill?
Funders,
I'm sorry.
unfortunately,
I'm
do
sorry.
care.
I tried to say when we worked in the G, I'm looking at Tam, like when we were there together, every bill is somebody's hopes and dreams. And we have to treat them as such, right? We treat them with the respect that... It's true, though. You might not like the dream. You might not agree with their hopes, but each of those little things is a hope and dream of somebody. So we try and treat them as such. Well, people, let's dream and hope a little bit bigger and a little bit longer term, right? Because these bills aren't going to add up to enough to solve the structural issues that we have. I wanted to, that was a long, sorry, +1 to Kate, but I also just wanted to add another piece of it, which we as advocates, I don't think about quite often enough, and that is, how do you take our hope and dream and actually operationalize it into true government? Yep. Let's talk about this billionaire's tax. Very, very hard to say we oppose a billionaire's tax from my side of the spectrum, right? Very hard to say that. But if you dig down just a couple of levels more, how are we actually going to measure one's wealth? I have said, are we going to hire Antiques Roadshow and send them out to people's homes so that I can look at your silver and your art and put a dollar amount on it, and then you're going to actually pay the true tax on that? Like, is that really operational? No. And should it be incumbent upon proponents to come up with the operational government-based plan to make that hope and dream a reality? So for us, I'm just going to implore the advocacy community, let's dig a little deeper. Let's work a little bit harder, because when I had a dog, you go to the dog park, the dogs pick up all the bad habits. Let's break all the bad habits. Let's set the stage and set the pace for the legislature. If we do better, they'll do better.
So you know what's interesting about this is that we're not unique. It used to be that all politics were local, and that's not true anymore. All politics are national. And so what is occurring in California and the more short-term thinking that we're talking about and some of the short-term solutions that are being put in place, that's true in nearly every other state in the country. And the more that there's, and this part is fascinating to me, the more that there's a supermajority, the more that is true, which is exactly backwards. You would think if you have a supermajority state, and it doesn't matter red or blue, it's totally irrelevant, but if you have a supermajority state, that your ability to do long-term planning and solve long-term complex policies is greater, but that is not what is occurring. And when I'm chatting with my colleagues across the country, that's what we're talking about, because the exact same thing that we're facing here is happening in Florida, but they're different colors, and in Ohio, and in Arizona, and all sorts of other states across the country. It's exactly the same thing. So there's something bigger than all of us that is happening, and we need to flip it the other way. And so that is the new governor, that is the legislature, and it is the advocacy community. It's all of us together to be able to move forward on a system that works more responsibly to our communities.
So some advice there for the legislative leaders. I wanted to ask about our new leaders in the legislature, Senate President Pro Tem Monique Limon. This is her first session in that position, and then Robert Rivas, the speaker, has been just hit his 3-year mark, I believe. Anyone have observations about the style of these two leaders and how that's changed the agenda or shaped what's been on the table in the past, this year and in recent years, I guess? Ben, I know you just came from a big meeting, so maybe I'll have you take that one first.
Can I punt my answer to Kimberly over there on this one? Okay, that's unfortunate. It's interesting. I would actually say that in terms of their style of management of their caucuses and of issues and things, I actually think there's probably a little bit more alignment between how the two of them operate than maybe we've seen in the past. I would say they're both, I wouldn't describe either of them as micromanagers. I think they're willing to let sort of their caucuses, and their committee chairs sort of take the lead on some of the different policies. And I think we've seen, there's been like a natural flow where, one house is maybe a little bit more moderate than the other, and then it's sort of switched. And, or one house, again, maybe is a little bit more top down than the other, and then it sort of switches back and forth. But I would say right now, look, we're in August. It's always tense between the two houses this time of year. I don't care how good of friends they are or not, if they don't get along. There's always going to be tension between the two houses this time of year. That's only natural. And certainly by the end of June, early July or whatever, everybody was sick of each other and wanted to get out of here. I think members, leaders, everything. But I would say their styles and operation, the way they sort of run their caucuses, I would actually say is probably more similar than we've seen for a while between the leaders of the two houses. So, yeah.
Angie, you've dealt with legislative leaders in your time. Do you have any advice for these two during the last few weeks here?
Put your seatbelt on and get ready for the ride. I feel for these leaders. The tenures are so short, and as soon as you get in there, you've got 40 or 80 mouths clamoring at you for every little thing. And these are not easy jobs. Never mind the public policy aspect of it all.
What about Governor Gavin Newsom as a policy influencer this year and the last 8 years during his term? How has he driven California's policy agenda? Yeah.
We're like looking at each other as the two veterans of that administration. Echoing something Grant said, it actually is, and I will bring UC in again. I was part of a UC panel that actually proved that this is true about supermajority states and the way that the policy happens in supermajority states. It's very fractured. It ends up being mostly about access to whoever has the most power, and in supermajority states, that is the governor, because you're the biggest party fundraiser, you're the head of the party, the governor has a lot of power in supermajority states traditionally in general, regardless of the state, which is interesting. So he has, California is unusual actually in the amount of involvement in the negotiations of the legislature that the governor's office has. So I think there's a lot of influence. Does that result in always coherent policymaking? No, because there's a lot of competing priorities. And so I think styles are really different, right? Like Governor Brown had a few things, famously, that he wanted to get done. And there's pluses and minuses of that. You're not doing a bunch of other things if you're doing a few things. If you want to get everything done, you're not necessarily clearly communicating priorities. And I'll just say from my perspective in the world of climate and energy, which is fundamentally about planning, it's about economic transition, it's about climate resilience, it's about trying to plan for the future. You actually need coherence in strategy. I think the governor needs to be setting long-term strategy and trying to have a North Star and helping get toward that. And I think that has been really hard, giving full understanding, and we lived it. This has been incredibly difficult tenure for this governor. We came into wildfires, we had COVID, they've had enormous numbers of things happen. So it's been really hard to set a North Star and do planning, but I don't know if Angie looks skeptical of everything I just said, so weigh in.
Well, I'm trying to think and be reflective of our time during Newsom, and it is. I cannot believe how fast 8 years goes, and I think some could be critical of Governor Newsom as being. Oh, please don't hear me say this. He likes the shiny objects. He'll follow for shiny objects. And some will take that as a criticism, mean it as a criticism. And I might have been one of those. But I've come around a little bit on there. and to say maybe it's better to follow some shiny objects and shoot high and miss some of the times than try and stay still and accept what comes. And, I think that some could criticize the governor for spreading the peanut butter a little too thinly, try to do too many things on too many fronts. And I, at one point, would probably share in that criticism as part of a staffing team that had to staff very thin peanut butter. Yeah. And now as I think about it, as I think about going forward, maybe that wasn't such a bad approach, because you got to spread that peanut butter to see what pops, and political windows open and close, and your seed may germinate at the time that the window opens, and you can actually run through it. During Governor Brown, I was an advocate, a lobbyist, and you were never quite sure how your thoughts and ideas got taken in the Brown administration. Was that a shared experience? Like, you kind of never knew because you never really got feedback. You kind of know with Newsom where you might be, and you might have a crazy idea that in one discussion, the next freaking thing you know is in a press statement 2 days later, because he's risk positive and he'll lean in. Going forward, I think we're going to have a different style of administration. Maybe something that's not as leaning in. Not as shiny.
Not as shiny, maybe.
Maybe slower paced, more deliberative, and we'll see how collectively we like that. It'll be an interesting contrast.
But I also think super fast. I think the peanut butter approach, which I agree can sometimes, or throwing spaghetti at the wall or whatever you want to say, can sometimes come with good outcomes. It is a lot easier to do that when you have a budget surplus than it is when you have deficits. Yep. So because you don't have the staff, the time, the capacity, the ability when you have a deficit. And I do think we all know this, but we are going into a world of a different kind of a set of constraints. So it'll be interesting to see both the leadership style, but also that reality.
Every governor, with the exception of Brown, in the last 40 years has left a deficit for the next one. Like, that's the pattern. That's how it actually functions. And what Brown did that was unique, and maybe it's because he's had like every role in California possible, and a lot of time in between some of those roles, is he actually in monasteries, yeah, he actually did think more longer term, and that coupled with the only working on a few things, those two things go together. Right? You can't both think long term and then do a gazillion things. And counties like jam over peanut butter. But so we have that
what
challenge.
What does that mean?
They're spreading we don't like protein.
Do we not spread the jam too? This is very confusing.
You just like glob it on.
That didn't work. Okay. Perhaps I need more long-term preparation for such things. What this governor has done is redefine how you engage with the public, and in a way that actually transformed policymaking. And he's done that in a way that I've not seen any other governor do, where the policy is often being created outside in, and he's able to effectively do that because he can create the framework of it. And it might be that it's the idea that happens in the cabinet meeting that turns into a press conference in 24 hours or whatever it might be, but he's done it exceptionally well, and it's made it very difficult for the legislature to push back often because the policymaking, it ends up being so far in front, and it's seemingly well crafted in the pitch that folks see that it is on a train on its own and it just takes off.
Can I sort of jump? I have actually a follow-up. I think Graham made a great point. This is really to Angie and Kate. I'm curious because I would agree with what you just said, Graham. And while the legislature, certainly over the last 8 years, I think has had a number of, certainly a number of like budget priorities and other things that they've taken the lead on, I think that most people would say that for the most part, when the governor sort of drove the agenda, he got what he wanted from the legislature. I'm curious, really, to the two vets of the administration. Do you think that was sort of inevitable because of just sort of the normal, push and pull with the legislature, and the houses didn't always agree a lot, particularly over the last 8 years? Or do you think COVID sort of supercharged that, and that really, I guess for a lack of a better term, obviously there was a recall out of it, but it did sort of imbue even greater authority into, I'd say, this governor sort of to be able to dictate things to the legislature.
I was going to say something a little potentially controversial. Not everybody always wants all that power. To be honest, I think we believe Gavin Newsom when he says, I don't want to appoint another U.S. senator or Supreme Court judge. Who wants all that? I mean, some people want all that power. But that's a lot of responsibility for generations go forward. And to be the one person to make all those decisions kind of sucks. Does anybody believe me? Honestly, I mean, it's hard to make those decisions. And, I remember during COVID, we had to, TAM, staffed, the state's plan to get COVID vaccines out. And I don't know if folks remember what a nightmare that was. And the legislature calling us every minute of every day saying, I'm not getting vaccines in my district. Your formula isn't right. You're supposed to be sending them out to these zip codes first. And so we finally said, you know what, fuck it. You guys want to have a plan for how to get the vaccines out? Do a bill, he'll sign it in a heartbeat. You want a plan, he'll get out of the way, you decide how to distribute the vaccines. And every single member is like, not me. So when we think about these decisions, we can complain. I'm really cleaning up my language here. We can complain, but you gotta also put yourself in that person's shoes and think, what does it really like to have to make every one of these calls? I don't remember what the point was,
No,
but just to share that perspective,
Yeah,
right?
I think, yes, and to your question, I do think we're in an era in some ways. This administration was hallmarked by these big executive decisions. Like the wildfires of 2018, all of that got put on the governor's office. The PG&E bankruptcy was one of the first things we all had to work on. That was all negotiated through the governor's office. The COVID was a world of executive orders, right? I mean, the reality is that COVID sped this along, but we are definitely in a moment, and we see this all over the place, of executive power, right? And that's created a big backlash in a lot of ways out there in the world, but it's also just a lot of what we've realized, I think, with these shocks to the system is that they were all bigger than individual districts and individual regions of the state. And so the state is left holding the bag for all these things at the end of the day and has to make big decisions. And so, yeah, it puts a ton of responsibility on the executive. And I think that has led to an era of that. And it'll be an interesting question. I mean, our legislature's never overturned a veto, right? I mean, it's an interesting question whether that changes going forward.
Well, let's talk about the next 3 weeks and 5 days and 11 or so hours. Not that, if anyone's counting. I want to maybe go down the line and just, what are the top thing that you're watching over these next few weeks?
So, Kate, you've actually mentioned wildfire, and wildfire liability is a huge issue, and there's a report that came out in January. It had a number of recommendations. Nothing has occurred since then. Something is going to occur, and it's an area of significant risk. And there is a question about, will this be another bailout for PG&E and the other utilities at the expense of communities, at the expense of wildfire victims, at the expense of local government? And we're hopeful that that is not going to be the answer, but there's certainly significant attempts to try to make that answer real. And I'll give one example. When 2018 fires in Sonoma, the sewer infrastructure 4 feet under the ground melted. And that's actually now occurred in multiple of these catastrophic fires. Some of the hope by the utilities and their shareholders is that local government fund that on our own when the utilities are responsible for the fire. And so this is not a new issue. This has been going on, this conversation has been going on for years, but there's a central component related to what happens on this issue that very well plays out over the next 23 days as we move up to the place where a bills can no longer be amended. And so it's August 28th that we're looking at. So that's relevant. HR1 related stuff is relevant. what to do related to the climate bond and distribution of those dollars is hugely relevant. So that is certainly something that is on the table. And there are 1,000 bills that have to be resolved between now and August 31st. And that's a lot, and it feels like 100 of them are AI related in some way, and they all restrict something, some activity of someone somewhere, and we probably need to tackle that to some degree, but whether we're going to be able to do it with all those bills right at the end of session is a significant question.
Kate, what are you keeping an eye on?
Oh, man. Wildfire, for sure, just to add on to that, there is no world in which all the things that people want will happen in a wildfire compromise. We cannot simultaneously pay victims quickly and enough, plus keep rates down, plus keep insurance companies here, plus have the state magically somehow cover all the costs those people aren't covering and still be able to afford it. It's just not possible. We can't do all. What we're having is a series of cost shifting conversations around wildfire and disaster where we're like, who's going to pay? You're going to pay, or you're going to pay, or I'm going to find someone to pay. Every one of those costs is fundamentally Californians. It's your policy, insurance policy, or it's your rates, or you're a taxpayer. It's all us. We're not really talking enough about the bigger issue, which is how are we reducing the risk in the first place, which is like the single most important thing to be talking about. We have got to figure out the liability piece. It's critically important. There's definitely things that can be done. But we also have to figure out how we're going to actually start reducing the risk. Right now, the utilities are one of the only players doing that. They're spending an enormous amount on wildfire mitigation. We're all paying for that through our bills. So how are we going to do that? Traditionally, we have done that through the Cap and Invest program as one of the big places to fund it. The Cap and Invest program is the other huge thing that we're watching because legislature was supposed to have, we were supposed to have a deal on how to spend the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund or GGRF funds by June, missed the deadline. That is a very live issue because CARB came back with a set of amendments in June that may functionally reduce the amount of money in the program by about half. That's created a massive fight over what to do with that money. The governor has a set of priorities that include money for CAL FIRE. We spend an average of $490 million a year on CAL FIRE right now through that fund. If the fund, with these reductions, it'll go down to about $38 million at a time when wildfires are like, we've got to do the risk reduction, we're wiping out these funds. So that's a big deal. The money's not there. High-speed rail is obviously a very live question. Transit is a real issue. Transit since COVID has been just at a cliff, and municipalities are trying, and counties are trying to figure out what to do about it. And you'll see bonds coming up all over the place. So that debate over Cap and Invest, both the CARB rules, which did pass, which give a bunch of new allowances to manufacturers, including refineries, very controversial, also reduces the amount of money, means the food fight is even bigger than usual, at the same time that we're trying to shift a whole bunch of costs onto the state and away from ratepayers and insurance premiums and wildfire victims. So it's really tough. Like, this is a whole bunch of new cost coming on at a time of a reduced set of funding, and everyone is watching this stuff like with bated breath. And I guess the last really quick thing that we're watching is, and it's sort of in the chamber's world too, is this whole fight around advanced manufacturing CEQA exemptions. There's a bill to roll back some of the exemptions that happened last year on advanced manufacturing, which includes clean energy manufacturing. Big fight about that bill and whether it goes too far in the other direction away from exemption. And just going back to my main point at the beginning, like, these are all trade-offs. Like, if we want to build a clean energy economy, we have to build stuff. If we want to build stuff, we have to build it in a way that actually works for people and communities. Those are all conversations we have to be having and making hard choices around, and doing it in this budget environment, which is like very, very constrained. So I think it's tough. I think it's doable, but it is going to take guts. It's all going to take a lot of political guts. What are you watching, Angie?
I'm watching to see how Ben Golombek and the Chamber of Commerce do this year.
So right.
I'm going to be interested in seeing how the governor signs and vetoes bills. I think he's had maybe a 16% veto rate. Does that go up or down in the last year? I don't know. The veto rate's going to go up?
That was actually going to be my last question for all of you. You stole it. You all think it's going to go up, that he's going to veto more bills this year?
Double.
Double.
Maybe not double, but
I'm an internal pessimist. I'm a New York Mets fan, so I have to be a pessimist. I will say it will stay the same.
Okay.
I'm with you. I think If the staff had their way, that number might be a lot higher.
That's always true.
And then, it's going to be it only happens once maybe every 8 years, right? I'm old. It hasn't happened that many times since I've been around. The transition into a new administration. To think about, there's an election, first Tuesday of November, and then you got to get a budget out Jan 10. That is a quick, painful turn. In the meantime, you've got to put a whole bunch of butts in seats. Every cabinet secretary, every undersecretary, your governor's office team. That is a lot of movement between the election and inauguration. And so I'll be very interested to see how that goes and which butts land in what seats and how all y'all are positioning yourselves in that process as well. I might also just take this second to say, I am older. There's nothing like public service. And I, was an advocate, a lobbyist for most of my life, and I did this end stint with the administration, and there's nothing like it. And if I can encourage folks to think about going into public service and to do the most good for the most people, it's an incredible privilege and honor. And it'll be like nothing, maybe, I would like to think, that you've ever experienced before. And, the battles that you go through to build the relationships that you have. I had a team that I helped manage in the governor's office. That's my crew for life. I am now on the hook to look out for and be responsible for every single person on that team till the end. Because that's the kind of relationships that you create in those types of environments. So if you're thinking about it, if you're a fence sitter on it, if you have any inkling to do it, I just say push yourself gently to really consider going into public service.
Here. Yeah, that is, I could not agree more. Best job I ever had was chief of staff in the assembly, without a doubt. So, and I love my job now, but best job I ever had. My first job was 2 doors down from Kimberly there. So, I agree with everything folks are watching at the end, particularly the AI piece. It is outrageous how many bills are still left in that space. But number one that I'm tracking and we're working on is antitrust. Anybody who's spent 2 seconds around me for the last sort of 9 months has probably heard me talk about antitrust. I was visiting somebody in the hospital, and by the end, a nurse said, "Good luck with the antitrust issue you're working on." So probably wasn't quite as good a friend as I needed to be there, but we'll work on that. But yeah. No. But anyways, no, there's a proposal moving through AB 1776, the supporters of which have said that they would like to create a new American Revolution, which is why they created that bill number. So certainly not an audacious goal with this bill, but we think it's very, 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 very flawed and dangerous, and so we're very laser focused on that.
We probably have time for one more question for Nicole before we go to the audience. So get your going. But I
Sounds
think
good.
Graham was going to chime in, or I'll let
Yeah,
you
go
as
ahead.
moderator take over again.
I was just going to reference, we've talked a lot about the governor and that we're going to have a new one, but 5 of the 8 constitutional officers are going to be different in January, at least, right? And so that's a substantial change in that level of power, too. A quarter of the folks that are in the Senate are going to be gone. So there's going to be change in the flavor of the Senate in terms of how they function. There's less change that will happen in the Assembly, but still there's going to be change nonetheless. All those folks need to figure out how to work together. And on the wildfire stuff that we talked about, we're going to have a new insurance commissioner. And that is a far more important role than most Californians realize. And there is huge opportunity for leadership, for driving policy, for getting to that balance point of protecting communities while still having a semblance of a marketplace for insurance in the state. And so that's a huge one that we haven't touched on quite yet, but just keep an eye on those, because those are all players that all those folks that are not going to be governor next year, they all want to be governor at some point in the future. That's why they're in those constitutional offices. And so we should keep an eye on that too.
I think it's proven that being insurance commissioner does not make you governor. It's like you can't come out of that job unscathed.
That is the one.
We are also just really quickly one of the few states that elects instead of appoints the insurance commissioner, and it's a job that really does need some expertise. So I will just say that you need some expertise to have that job, especially now.
Okay, for last question, we've talked about so much that needs to happen here in the next few weeks. I guess for the last question, I want to have each of you make a prediction about what will not happen and what will get punted to next year with a new administration. Insurance, wildfire insurance issue, cap and invest, more AI fights.
Well, there's no question AI is going to be pushed to next year, but there'll still be things that happen this year. But we haven't figured out as a state what to do with it. It's changing everything. It's changing business practice. It's changing government practice. It's changing us as individuals in terms of what our access to resources may be. And so that's not going to be solved. There's no way that that's going to be solved this year. But there'll be a few things that happen, and they might create new headaches for folks. We'll see.
Before anybody takes it. Because it's literally been punted till next year is the conversation about this quote-unquote fair share tax plan. I think that this is going to be a massive, it got, while there was some debate and discussion this year, it got put into a study that's supposed to be done
By March,
I think, yeah.
And that is that it would raise taxes on companies that pay their workers low enough wages that they rely on public benefits.
Yeah, not quite, but yes, conceptually, I understand where we're going with that. So,
We're short on time.
We can come back for that debate in the spring. I don't think the timing was a surprise that it happened after this legislative session was going to be over, obviously. But I think that the confluence of, we talked about HR 1 and the impact, obviously, in healthcare and local and state governments, the looking at the budget and long-term budget deficit that the state's facing, I think that is going to dominate the conversation certainly next year and early in the new governor's term.
Well, thank you all so much.
Okay, yeah, so we do have time for audience questions. So there's some mics in the back, and this one came up first. Lightning round answers, and please land that question succinctly.
Hi, I'm Kate Wolf with Cal Matters. I'm wondering, the governor hasn't said much about California Forever, but GoBiz put out a memo signaling they're very interested in development in Solano County. Is California Forever another one of those shiny objects that you mentioned, and what would it mean for Newsom if he landed it this session?
Lightning round answers. Don't all grab at the mic
the
first.
big thing on it got punted already. The question about a special CEQA exemption. It is California Forever to be done will require a significant amount of investment in infrastructure that will take years and years and years and multiple planning processes. There's no fast thing you can do with this, whether it's the industrial land, whether it's the shipbuilding, which we lost the bid to Texas, which is why this isn't moving the way people thought. So I think the market has a role in this, infrastructure and planning has a role, the local government has a role. Nothing will ever be fast with this project, so it was put out there as a fast solution to a bunch of things. It's never going to be a fast solution to a bunch of things. Whatever happens is not going to happen immediately.
Got it. Okay, got some more coming over here. And I'm going to play favorites for our UC State Government Relations team. Erin.
Thank you so much. So this is a question for the whole panel, and I know my colleague shares the same question because we were just talking about it, but I observed that you guys spent probably the first 45 minutes of the panel not covering sort of the remaining issues or budget issues before the legislature specifically, but really about governance and the changing nature of governance in California. And I think you put your finger on some of the dynamics that maybe some of us in the advocacy community have been thinking about or observing for the past few years now. And I would like to know what is bringing that to the forefront now? Like, why is that a hot issue right now? Like, why did you spend 45 minutes just talking about governance?
I don't know if we can do a lightning round answer to that, but I would just say, I think it's the two things I certainly saw, I think, is one, sorry, Catherine, clusterfuck of negotiation going on
I didn't
around
say the
all
word,
ballot
you did.
measures. I was channeling my inner Angie. And I also think there's some element of it's natural at the end of this governor's term, and as we're looking ahead to a new governor, that's sort of an opportunity to sort of be like, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what do we want to try to do better? So I think those were sort of two natural sort of confluences coming together, at least I think from my end.
So I think From my perspective, it's not about the end of session. It is about the world has changed, and COVID fast-tracked something that was already happened that perhaps would have taken 20 years. But the way people get information today is different than they got it before. The access to be able to push and deliver negative messages to government, to communities, to the public, are like something we've never seen before. And so things are moving so fast, people don't know who to trust, and as a result, bad information is influencing what is happening in government and the ability to govern. And so that's happening at all levels. It's happening at the national level, the state level, it's happening at the local level, and that's not going to change. And so I think, like, part of my interest in talking about this is that the world is dramatically different. That's not going to, we're not going back, and we have to figure out how to engage in a way that protects our communities and delivers responsive and good public policy in an environment that is now curated to destroy that. And so this is a very long-term problem, which is why my answer is not a lightning round answer. But we're at the beginning of that. The awareness is growing, and we need to figure out ways to adapt at all levels of government and the community that is working on policy in order to get it done.
Great. Okay, looking for one more. Jim, I see you. Well, I've got Angie up there with the hot mic. Any quick tips, Angie, for a team? I'm over here. You can see me from our wonderful columns on what not to do if you want your bill to make it through end of session.
Oh, how to get your bill signed? I'll say one is if you're being offered amendments from the administration, take them. You'd be shocked at some people are like, I don't know, but
Yeah. Okay, good.
people might be like gently, this is technical assistance. It's not. It's do or die for your bill. So if anybody offers you amendments from the administration, take them.
See the writing on the wall. Got it. Any other tips for staff or advocates?
The other thing I might say, this is going to be a little bit maybe too under the tent, but, and this might surprise you, but it is the job of the staff and the administration to make everybody happy. Advocates, legislators, other staffers, it is our job to make people happy. If you have somebody who's unhappy, then we have a problem, right? And so as you're thinking about the advocacy behind the bill, make sure that you're on the side of happiness, right? Make sure that your legislator, like, isn't in the shitter and gonna bat 0 for 10, right? Don't go with that person. Or if you make sure that you're in your legislator's getting something signed, that your bill is one of those things that they're getting signed, right? So if you think about the lens of happiness, just try and walk in the light of happiness.
Oh my gosh, that is the best advice I've ever heard.
Joy with the legislative process.
All right, last one, Jim from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question on cap and invest, whether you would hazard any forward or any prognostications about what might happen there. Obviously it was funding climate research, which has been devastated, and some clean energy R&D that's also, but there's a whole bunch of other things that the cap and invest program was funding.
Cap and invest, what's happening?
I mean, there's no world in which it can do all the things that people wanted to do, and there never has been. It's a dedicated separate budget from the general fund, which is why everyone looks to it for everything. But with the federal government backing out of the number of things they've backed out of, the need is greater now, and the money is less, and now even less than it was. So there's no way it will do everything we want it to do. It's going to be, at the end of the day, a very difficult negotiation, and Angie's advice is good. The governor's office has a very big investment in this, in how this plays out, and I think they're going to lean in really hard on
Ben?
it.
I'll just try to remind everybody that we do in every meeting that we're in on Cap and Invest is that it was designed to be a cost-efficient way of creating emissions reduction. It was not meant to just sort of be a piggy bank. And so literally the design of the program is that over time, the amount of money is going to reduce as our emissions reduce. And so I know that's hard for, everybody gets attached to their program that's getting funded, and there is some good work that's being done. And Cal Chamber was a supporter of the program. I want to be clear on that. But just a gentle reminder to folks that it is meant to be a emissions reduction
And
program.
to be fair, really quickly, that's because everything got shoved in there. And so we need the rest of government to be about these big issues of energy transition and climate resilience, not just that one program with that one fund. It can never be all things to all people because we are fundamentally changing the economy, which has to happen across the entire government. That's a commitment we've got to be making, all of us. So I think putting all the weight on that one piece is actually not in the service of the overall agenda for advocates.
Someone who voted on cap and trade before it was cap and invest, 10 years ago. Yeah. So I can attest that that is correct. There was a vision that this was going to be a change, and here we are a decade later. I do want to say to the governance question before we wrap up, I am committed to having a thoughtful program on a gubernatorial transition here at the center. What should it look like? What is the opportunity? How to be more strategic thinking? And that's nonpartisan or bipartisan conversation because transitions don't happen that often. And clearly, an undercurrent here is how can we do better? Better, faster, stronger, more effective government. Thank you for a fantastic moderator and panel, and delighted to have you here. If you want to know when that transition program will be, or our conference on healthcare, where we'll talk about so much more, or many of the other great programs we'll have this fall, please sign up for a newsletter. We'll look forward to seeing you here at the center.